My name is Jade Morrison. I'm 36 years old, and last night was supposed to be one of the most important nights of my career. A night that proved that everything I had built, every sleepless night, every sacrifice had been worth it. The evening was immaculate, the chandeliers glowing like molten gold, the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter filling the grand hall of the Rosewood Hotel. The annual gala was hosted by the Global Science Initiative, a prestigious organization recognizing breakthroughs in scientific research. And this year, I was the honoree. It was a moment I had dreamed of, a celebration of years spent buried in research, of the endless battles I had fought to be taken seriously in my field. I had worked tirelessly in molecular biology, focusing on genetic engineering to combat rare diseases. And tonight, they were recognizing me for it. But even as I stood among esteemed colleagues, graciously accepting handshakes and congratulations, something inside me was restless. The pressure, the attention, it was suffocating. I slipped away from the grand ballroom, my heels clicking against the polished marble floors as I made my way to the restroom. I just needed a moment alone, a deep breath before returning to the spotlight. And that was when I saw her. She stood at the sink, reapplying her lipstick with the same poised elegance I remembered all too well. The soft amber light reflected against her flawless skin, her signature pearl necklace resting just above the collar of her midnight blue gown. My mother, a woman I hadn't seen in 18 years. For a split second, I considered turning around and walking right back out. Maybe she wouldn't notice me. Maybe I could pretend this never happened. But then her eyes flicked up to the mirror and met my reflection. Her hands stilled, her perfectly polished lips parted ever so slightly in surprise before she caught herself, masking any emotion with the precision of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of detachment. "Jade," she said, her voice calm, smooth, like we were two acquaintances exchanging pleasantries at a country club instead of a mother and daughter who had spent nearly 2 decades estranged. I gripped the edge of the sink, steadying myself. "Margaret," I replied, matching her tone. I refused to call her Mom. That word didn't belong to her anymore. A ghost of a smirk played at the corners of her lips. "I didn't expect to see you here." I inhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral. I could say the same. She turned fully to face me now, her posture as rigid as I remembered. "Your father and I were invited, of course. We have always supported advancements in science and education. And you." I met her gaze, unwavering. "I'm being honored tonight. For my work in genetic research." There it was. A flicker of something in her eyes before she quickly masked it. "I see," she said, turning back to the mirror. She adjusted the clasp of her necklace with practiced elegance. "Well, everyone finds their way eventually." The words cut sharper than they should have. I was transported back to the last night I spent under their roof, the night I left, discarded like an afterthought. I clenched my jaw, exhaling quietly. I had to get out of there. Without another word, I turned and walked out, my pulse hammering in my ears. The night I had dreamed of, the night I had worked so hard for, had just been tainted by a single encounter with the woman who had once made me feel like I was worth nothing. But I wouldn't let her take this from me. Not this time. The sound of my heels striking the marble floor echoed through the hallway, a rhythmic reminder that I was still here, still present, still the woman I had fought so hard to become. But my mind was already elsewhere, unraveling the past like an old, worn-out film reel playing against my will. Jade Morrison. That name meant something now. It carried weight, respect, recognition. But back then, back in the house I grew up in, beneath the cold and calculated gaze of Margaret and William Morrison, it had meant nothing at all. I had been nothing at all. I was 16 the first time I realized I didn't belong in my own family. Not just in the way that all teenagers feel out of place at some point. No, this was something deeper, something irreversible, as if I were a foreign object placed in the middle of a perfectly curated exhibit, disrupting its polished symmetry. In the Morrison household, everything was about appearances. We lived in a sprawling estate in Westchester, the kind of place with immaculately trimmed hedges, imported marble floors, and a grand chandelier that had been shipped from Italy piece by piece. My father, William Morrison, was a well-known business mogul in the pharmaceutical industry, and my mother, Margaret Morrison, was the epitome of high society grace. She ran charity events, attended fundraisers, and maintained the pristine image of the Morrison name with the precision of a military strategist. Failure was not tolerated. Weakness was not acknowledged. And emotions? Emotions were a liability. My older brother, Christopher, fit the mold perfectly. He had been born into the role of the golden child and wore it like a tailored suit. Straight A's, captain of the debate team, early acceptance into Princeton. He was everything they wanted. Everything I was supposed to be. But I wasn't. I had never been. Where Christopher was polished and diplomatic, I was rebellious and restless. Where he thrived under pressure, I suffocated beneath it. And I felt it every single day. The weight of expectations I could never meet. The suffocating disappointment etched into my father's tight-lipped silence, the cold indifference in my mother's perfectly measured words. But the moment that solidified everything, the moment I knew, beyond any doubt, that I was utterly alone, came on a Sunday evening in late spring, just a few weeks before my high school graduation. I had been accepted into a state university. Not Yale. Not Harvard. Not the Ivy League institution they had planned for me. A state school. The shame it brought to the Morrison name was palpable. I had worked hard for that acceptance letter. Harder than they would ever understand. My grades weren't perfect, but I had poured every ounce of myself into school, into my love for science, into something that actually felt real to me. I had wanted them to be proud of me. Even a little. Instead, my father didn't even look up from his newspaper when I told them. And my mother? She took a slow sip of her tea, her expression unreadable. "You could have done better," she said simply. "But I suppose we all have to live with our choices." I had felt the walls closing in then. The suffocating weight of their disappointment pressing against my chest like an iron vice. I could have done better. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of my effort. No pride. Only the certainty that I had once again failed to be what they wanted me to be. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a fight that had been brewing for years, but that night it finally boiled over. I had come home late from my part-time job at the library. I had taken the job not because I needed the money, we had more money than I could ever spend, but because it was the only place where I felt like I could breathe. When I walked through the grand front doors, my father was waiting. He stood in the foyer, arms crossed, jaw tight. My mother was beside him, as composed as ever, sipping from a crystal glass of white wine. "You are an embarrassment," my father said, his voice cold and razor-sharp. "Sneaking around at all hours, refusing to take your future seriously. Do you even understand what you're doing to this family?" I gripped my bag tighter. "I'm working, studying, trying to figure out my own life." His eyes darkened. "Your own life? Your life is a direct reflection of this family. And right now, you are nothing but a disgrace to it." I felt something inside me crack. I had spent years trying to meet their impossible expectations, suffocating under the weight of their standards. But no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. I was never enough. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking, but not with fear, with clarity. "I don't care anymore. I'm done trying to be someone I'm not just to make you happy." For the first time in my life, my mother actually looked surprised. My father, on the other hand, had never looked more disgusted. "You want to be done?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "Fine. Then leave. Pack your things. If you won't live by this family's standards, you won't live under this family's roof." I searched his face, waiting for the moment when he would take it back, when he would realize what he had just said. But that moment never came. My mother turned away first, taking another delicate sip of her wine, as if the conversation had already bored her. My father didn't say another word. They had made their choice. And I made mine. I walked up to my room, grabbed a duffel bag, stuffed it with whatever I could fit, and walked right back out that front door. No one stopped me. No one called after me. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, my entire life crammed into a single bag slung over my shoulder, I felt the crushing weight of what had just happened. I had no plan, no backup, no safety net. But I did have one thing: freedom. And for the first time in my life, I could finally breathe. The night I left the Morrison estate, I had nowhere to go. I had no close friends, not the kind you could crash with indefinitely anyway. In my world, friendships were transactional, built on status and mutual benefit. I was no longer a Morrison in their eyes, which meant I was of no use to anyone who had once pretended to care about me. I spent my first night on a bench in a quiet park a few miles away from home, my duffel bag shoved under my legs for some pathetic sense of security. The summer air was warm, but the reality of what I had just done left an ice-cold pit in my stomach. I had no money, no job, and no idea what came next. But I had left. And I wasn't going back. By sheer luck, or maybe stubborn determination, I found a job 2 days later at a tiny diner on the outskirts of town. It wasn't glamorous. It smelled of burnt coffee and greasy bacon, and the floor was perpetually sticky no matter how many times we mopped it. But it was a paycheck, and that was more than I could say for anything else in my life at the time. I worked doubles whenever I could, taking any shift they'd give me. The first few weeks, I was running on pure adrenaline, too focused on surviving to process the emotional wreckage I had left behind. Every night, I collapsed onto a lumpy mattress in a cramped studio apartment I could barely afford. The rent was obscene for what I was getting, but beggars couldn't be choosers. It was a converted attic with one window that barely let in any sunlight, a bathroom so small I could brush my teeth while sitting on the toilet, and an unreliable radiator that rattled like it was possessed. But it was mine. My parents didn't call. Not once. Some stupid part of me had thought they might. That my mother might at least check in, if only out of some superficial obligation. But no. They erased me as cleanly as if I had never existed. I started college that fall. I had almost talked myself out of it more times than I could count. I was exhausted all the time, constantly running on caffeine and whatever free leftovers I could snag from the diner. Tuition was a mountain I had no idea how to climb. I barely had time to do my coursework between shifts, and I had no safety net to catch me if I failed. But I went. I showed up to every class. I sat in the front row. I took meticulous notes. And slowly, something strange happened. I started to believe I belonged there. Science had always made sense to me in a way that nothing else ever had. Numbers, formulas, reactions, they didn't judge. They didn't care about last names or status or reputation. They just were. I latched onto chemistry with an almost obsessive focus. It was the one thing in my life that felt stable, something I could control. The first real test of my ability came in my general chemistry class. It was a weed-out course, designed to thin the herd, to separate those who were just passing through from those who really wanted it. I studied harder than I ever had before. Every free minute at the diner, I had my notes spread out on the counter, balancing textbooks between coffee orders. When the professor handed back our first big exam, my hands were shaking as I turned over the paper. 94%. For the first time in years, I felt something I had long since forgotten. Pride. It wasn't just about proving my parents wrong anymore. It was about proving me wrong. By my second semester, I had figured out a system. I picked up extra tutoring gigs, helping struggling students with chemistry in exchange for whatever they could afford to pay me. I applied for scholarships like my life depended on it, because, in a way, it did. And I kept my head down. I didn't have time for distractions, for friendships, for anything that didn't contribute directly to survival. But despite my isolation, Despite the exhaustion that became my constant companion, I was thriving in a way I never had before. For the first time, I wasn't suffocating under the crushing weight of their expectations. I wasn't trying to be a Morrison. I was just Jade. That summer, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. I got an email from Christopher, my perfect, golden boy older brother. He had graduated from Princeton by then, well on his way to becoming my father's right-hand man in the company. We hadn't spoken since the night I left home. I stared at his name in my inbox for a long time before finally opening it. Jade, I heard you're in college. Mom and Dad don't talk about you, but I know they know. I don't know why I'm even writing this, but I guess I just wanted to say, I don't think they were right about you. I hope you're okay. I read the message 5 times before closing my laptop. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't offer help. He didn't apologize. And I didn't reply. The years blurred together after that. I finished my associate's degree, then transferred to a 4-year university. The competition was tougher. The expectations were higher. But I had already spent years proving myself to people who didn't care. I wasn't about to start doubting myself now. I kept pushing forward. And people started noticing. One professor, Dr. Patel, took an interest in my work. She saw something in me that I hadn't fully recognized yet, potential. Have you ever considered research? She asked me one afternoon after class. I hesitated. I don't know if I'm good enough for something like that. She raised an eyebrow. You're one of the most dedicated students I've ever had. You should apply for the summer research program. You have what it takes. I didn't believe her. Not at first. But then I thought about everything I had been through. Every obstacle I had clawed my way over. And I realized something. Maybe I did have what it takes. So I applied. And I got in. That summer, I worked in a real lab for the first time, conducting research on gene sequencing. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. And it was the first time in my life that I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I didn't just survive. I thrived. By the time I graduated, I had already secured a place in a prestigious PhD program. Me, the girl who had been told she was an embarrassment, a failure, a disgrace to her family name. But I wasn't a Morrison anymore. I was Jade. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. The day I walked into my PhD program, I felt it again, the doubt, the whisper of inadequacy that had followed me for years, lurking in the back of my mind like an unwelcome ghost. The program at Columbia was one of the most competitive in the country. My peers had come from Ivy League schools, boasting recommendations from Nobel laureates and research experience from world-renowned institutions. They spoke about their internships at places I could never have dreamed of affording, about the scientific legacies they were carrying on from generations before them. I was the outlier. The girl who had clawed her way here from a community college and a diner, who had no powerful last name to open doors for her, no prestigious connections to vouch for her worth. I kept my head down, just as I had before. Let them underestimate me. Let them think I didn't belong. Because I knew better. And I was done proving myself to anyone but me. The first semester was brutal. The coursework was relentless. The expectations were sky high. I spent more nights in the lab than in my apartment, subsisting on vending machine coffee and granola bars, running experiments that failed more often than they succeeded. But failure didn't scare me anymore. It fueled me. Every setback was a puzzle to solve. Every mistake was a lesson. And slowly, I started to make a name for myself. By the end of my first year, I had secured a spot in Dr. Lin's lab, working on a groundbreaking project in genetic sequencing. Dr. Lin was known for being ruthless in her expectations. She didn't coddle her students. She didn't tolerate mediocrity. And yet, when she reviewed my first research proposal, she didn't dismiss me like so many others had before. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the desk. "This is ambitious," she said. I braced myself for the inevitable critique. But I like ambitious. I exhaled, tension draining from my shoulders. I'll approve it, she continued. But don't waste my time. If you commit to this, you follow through. I nodded, my hands gripping the edges of my notebook. I will. And I did. The research consumed me. Day and night, I poured myself into the project, running tests, analyzing data, refining my hypotheses. I presented my findings at lab meetings, defending my work against some of the sharpest minds in the field. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was excelling. People were noticing. Professors who had barely acknowledged me before started asking about my work. My name appeared on papers. I was invited to speak at conferences, to collaborate with researchers I had once only read about in textbooks. I had spent my entire life feeling like an outsider. Now, for the first time, I was at the center of something important. And I wasn't going to let it slip away. 3 years into my program, I received an email that changed everything. It was from Dr. Lin. Jade, I need you to come to my office at 10 a.m. tomorrow. There's an opportunity one think you should consider. That night, I barely slept. When I arrived at her office the next morning, she wasted no time. There's a conference in Geneva next month, she said, pushing a folder across the desk toward me. The International Summit on Genomic Research, one of the most prestigious in our field. I nodded, my pulse quickening. They've invited our lab to present, she continued. I want you to be the one to do it. My breath caught. Me. Not the postdocs. Not the senior researchers. Me. Dr. Lin studied me over the rim of her glasses. You've earned this, she said simply. Don't make me regret it. The weeks leading up to the conference were a blur of preparation. I refined my presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep. I practiced answering every possible question they might throw at me. And when I finally stood on that stage in Geneva, staring out at an audience filled with some of the most brilliant scientists in the world, I felt something I hadn't expected. Calm. I wasn't the same girl who had been thrown out of her parents' house, who had spent nights wondering if she had made a mistake leaving. I had built something for myself. And I belonged here. The conference changed everything. My research caught the attention of people I had never dreamed would notice me. A month after I returned from Geneva, I received an offer for a research position at a leading genetics lab in London. It was the kind of opportunity people in my field fought for. The kind of opportunity my father's money could have bought me years ago if I had stayed under his control. But I had gotten here on my own. And I wasn't stopping now. Leaving New York felt different this time. The first time I had left, I had nothing. No plan, no future, just a duffel bag and a desperate need to escape. This time, I was leaving because I had everything. The morning of my flight, I took one last walk through my neighborhood, letting the city sink into my bones one last time. I passed the coffee shop where I had spent so many late nights studying, the library where I had hidden between the stacks, devouring research papers like they were lifelines, the diner where I had worked double shifts, burning my hands on hot plates and smelling like grease for days. It had all been worth it. And now it was time for something bigger. London was different in every way. The weather, the people, the rhythm of the city. But the work was the same. The research lab was everything I had hoped for. State-of-the-art facilities. A team of brilliant minds who challenged me every day. For the first time, I wasn't just a student. I was a lead researcher. And my work was making a difference. The papers I published weren't just academic exercises anymore. They were contributing to real breakthroughs, to advancements that could change lives. I had done it. I had become the scientist I had always dreamed of being. But there was still one thing I hadn't faced. One thing I had spent years avoiding. My past. It happened out of nowhere. An invitation. A gala in New York. An award. Recognition for my contributions to the field of genetic research. I stared at the invitation for a long time, my fingers hovering over the RSVP. Going back meant risking everything I had built. But maybe, just maybe, it was time. I pressed accept. And just like that, The past I had spent years running from was waiting for me. Waiting for me to face it. Waiting for me to end it. The flight back to New York felt surreal. It had been nearly a decade since I had set foot in the city, and now I was returning not as the girl who had left with nothing but a duffel bag and defiance, but as Dr. Jade Morrison, a scientist being honored for her contributions to the field of genetic research. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had once walked out of the city feeling like I had no future, and now I was coming back because my work had made a difference, because I had carved out a life for myself without them. And yet, as the plane descended and the skyline came into view, something twisted uncomfortably in my chest. I told myself I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this for me. For the girl who had been told she wasn't good enough. For the girl who had once sat in the back of a chemistry class, doubting whether she even had the right to be there. For the woman who had fought for every inch of ground she stood on now. And yet, deep down I knew. A part of me still wanted them to see. Not for validation. Not for approval. But for acknowledgement. For once, I wanted them to know what they had thrown away. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel suite, adjusting the sleek black dress I had chosen for the event. It was simple, elegant, nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed for attention. I didn't need to prove anything with appearances. Not anymore. As I stared at my reflection, I thought about how much had changed. The girl I had been at 18 wouldn't recognize the woman standing here now. And maybe that was a good thing. The event was held in one of Manhattan's grandest hotels, a glittering sea of chandeliers and polished marble. The moment I walked in, I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes shifting toward me. Some in recognition, some in curiosity, and some in shock. I spotted them almost immediately. Margaret and William Morrison. My parents. They were standing near the bar, dressed in the kind of effortless opulence that had once defined my entire world. For a moment, neither of them moved. And then my mother's lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't expected me to come. I could see it in the way her posture stiffened, in the way my father's grip tightened around his whiskey glass. Good. Let them feel uncomfortable. Let them sit with the reality of what they had abandoned. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. I wasn't here for them. I was here because I deserved to be. And as I stepped forward into the ballroom, shaking hands with colleagues and exchanging greetings with people who actually respected me, I felt it again. That certainty. I had built this life with my own hands. And there wasn't a single thing they could do to take it away from me. The night unfolded in a blur of speeches, laughter, and recognition. When my name was announced for the award, I walked onto that stage with steady steps, my heart pounding, but not from nerves, from pride. I stood before the microphone, glancing at the sea of faces in front of me. Some familiar, some unknown, and two who had never expected to see me standing here at all. For a brief moment, I let my eyes linger on them. My father, expression unreadable. My mother, poised as ever, but with something in her eyes I couldn't quite place. I turned away. They were just two faces in the crowd now. Nothing more. I took a breath and began to speak. I never imagined I'd be standing here tonight, I started. Not because I doubted my work, but because, for a long time, I doubted myself. A pause. When I was younger, I was told I wouldn't amount to much. That I was wasting my time, that I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't have what it took. Silence settled over the room. I wasn't looking at my parents anymore. I was speaking to the girl I used to be. To anyone who has ever felt like they didn't belong. To anyone who has ever been made to feel like they weren't enough. This is for you. Because you are enough. And you always have been. Applause erupted around me. But I barely heard it, because in that moment I felt something lift from my chest. The weight of their expectations. The burden of their rejection. The need for their acknowledgement. Gone. Later that night, after the speeches had ended and the formalities had dissolved into casual conversation, I stepped outside onto the terrace, inhaling the crisp night air. I wasn't alone for long. I knew she would come. Margaret Morrison was never one to let things go unanswered. "You gave quite the speech," she said, her voice smooth as ever. I didn't turn to face her. I meant every word. A pause. Then, "You've built quite a life for yourself." There was no warmth in the words. But there was something else. Resignation. She knew she had lost. And she couldn't ignore it anymore. For years, I had dreamed of this moment. The moment where she would finally see me. But standing here, I realized I didn't need her to. I turned to her, meeting her gaze with a calm that startled even me. I said simply. "And I did it without you." For the first time in her life, my mother had nothing to say. And that was the greatest victory of all. I left my mother standing on the terrace, her expression unreadable, and walked back into the warmth of the ballroom. I had no more words left for her. Nothing else to give. The moment I had once dreamed of, watching her search for something, anything, to say in her defense, had come and gone, and all I felt was nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just finality. I stepped back into the crowd, feeling the weight of my past slipping away like a phantom dissolving into the night. And then I saw him. William Morrison. My father stood near the back of the room, his whiskey glass still in hand, his gaze locked onto me. Unlike my mother, he hadn't sought me out. He had made no move to speak to me. But his presence alone was enough to make the air feel heavier. For years, he had been the immovable force in my life. The man who had decided, in a single moment, that I wasn't worth keeping. And now? Now, he was just another man in a suit, standing in a room full of people who respected the daughter he had cast aside. A cruel twist of fate. I had spent so long fearing him, carrying the weight of his rejection like an anchor around my neck. But now, looking at him, I saw him for what he truly was. A man who thought control was power. And yet, I had slipped from his grip, built something of my own, and now stood before him as someone he no longer had a say over. It was almost pitiful. I turned away. But I should have known better. William Morrison never let things go. I had barely taken 2 steps before I heard his voice. Low. Sharp. Controlled. "Jade." I paused but didn't turn around. He wouldn't get to summon me like a child anymore. Seconds stretched between us. Finally, I exhaled and faced him. He studied me like I was something foreign, something he didn't quite recognize. "You've made quite the name for yourself," he said, echoing my mother's words from earlier. I tilted my head slightly. "You almost sound surprised." A flicker of something crossed his face, gone before I could catch it. "You've worked hard," he admitted. "I can see that. It should have meant something. Should have felt like an acknowledgement. But it didn't. Because there was no pride in his voice. No real admiration. Just an observation. Like I was an anomaly in his carefully controlled world. "Tell me," I said, my voice even, "was it difficult to watch?" His jaw tightened. "Watch what?" "Watch me succeed," I said. "Without you. Without your help. Without your name." A slow breath. A slight shift of his stance. But no denial. Silence stretched between us. Then, finally, "I don't regret my decision." Of course, he didn't. That was the thing about William Morrison. He would rather die than admit he was wrong. I should have walked away. But something inside me wouldn't let me. Maybe it was the years of unspoken words clawing their way to the surface. Maybe it was the realization that this was the only closure I was ever going to get. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to look him in the eye and end this. So I didn't walk away. Instead, I stepped closer. "You don't regret it?" I repeated, my voice calm, measured. "Not even for a second?" He met my gaze, unflinching. "I made the choice that was best for this family." I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Best for the family?" I echoed. "You threw your daughter out of your house, cut her off completely, and never looked back. And you think that was best for the family?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "Look at where you are now," he said. "Would you have gotten here if I hadn't forced you to stand on your own?" It was such a William Morrison thing to say. To rewrite history. To frame his cruelty as some kind of twisted act of guidance. Like he had given me a gift by abandoning me. Like my success was somehow his to take credit for. I felt my nails dig into my palm. You really believe that, don't you? I said softly. He didn't answer. And that was enough. Enough to know that this wasn't a conversation. It never had been. Because William Morrison wasn't capable of seeing himself as anything but right. It didn't matter that I had survived in spite of him. It didn't matter that I had thrived in ways he had never imagined. Because, in his mind, he was still the one in control. Still the one who had made me. But he was wrong. I made myself. And now I was going to finish this. I exhaled slowly, the last remnants of anger settling into something colder. I used to think about this moment, I admitted. About what I would say if I ever saw you again. His expression didn't change. I spent years carrying the weight of your words, I continued. Trying to prove something to you. To myself. Wondering if, deep down, you ever thought about me. If you ever felt guilt. If you ever wished things had been different. Silence. But now, I tilted my head. I don't care. His eyes flickered, just for a second. Not much, but enough. Enough for me to know that he knew. That he had lost whatever hold he once had on me. That I wasn't afraid of him anymore. And that burned more than anything I could have said. I took a slow step back. There's nothing left to say, I told him. Whatever story you tell yourself to justify what you did, keep it. It's yours. Then, finally, I turned. And I walked away. Not just from him. But from all of it. As I stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around me like a cleansing breath. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to finally get the last word. To finally win. But the truth was, winning wasn't about words. Winning was about walking away. Without anger. Without regret. Without the weight of them on my shoulders anymore. And for the first time in my life, I was free. The city lights stretched out before me as I stepped into the quiet night. The air was crisp, the sounds of Manhattan a distant hum against the roar of my own thoughts. I had done it. I had walked away. No explosive confrontation, no dramatic parting words, just the simple act of leaving them behind. And it was enough. For the first time, I didn't feel the pull of their voices in my head. Didn't feel the need to dissect their every reaction, their every word, searching for some hidden meaning, some validation I had long since outgrown. I felt light. Free. The next morning, I packed my things and checked out of the hotel. The gala was over. The chapter was closed. And I was done with this place. My flight back to London wasn't until the evening, but I had no interest in lingering. There was nothing left for me here. I spent the afternoon wandering through the city, revisiting places that had once been a part of my life. The old library near my college, where I had spent hours hunched over textbooks, desperate to prove I was good enough. The coffee shop where I had crammed for exams, drinking cheap lattes and hoping, for once, I wouldn't fail. The diner where I had worked late nights, scrubbing tables and pouring coffee, wondering if I would ever make it out of this cycle of exhaustion and survival. I wasn't that girl anymore. And standing in these places now, I realized I never would be again. As I sat in a quiet park, sipping coffee and watching the world pass by, my phone buzzed. An email. I glanced at the sender. Oxford University. My heart skipped. I had applied for a visiting professor position months ago, never daring to believe I would actually get it. My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally opened the email. Dear Dr. Morrison, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the visiting scholar position in molecular genetics. Your work has made a profound impact in the field, and we believe your expertise will be invaluable to our program. We look forward to welcoming you to Oxford. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I laughed. Because it was funny, wasn't it? I had spent years believing I had to prove something. To them. To myself. But in the end, my work had spoken for itself. I had spoken for myself. And I had won. Not in the way I once thought I would. Not by forcing them to acknowledge me, but by thriving despite them. And now? Now, I was going to Oxford. To a future I had built with my own hands. A future that had nothing to do with the name I had left behind. As my plane lifted off that evening, I watched the city shrink below me. I felt no sadness. No nostalgia. Just peace. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't proving anything anymore. I was simply moving forward. And for the first time in my life, that was all I needed. The end.